David, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Savannah. And actually, I want to start by thanking you for all of your hard work. And I've enjoyed working with you. And thank the Art Skill, Amanda Brown, and for supporting this. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. And thank everyone who's joined us. There's quite a list of people I know from even college, my family, various levels of that, and teachers in the photographic world, spiritual teachers. So for me, it's really a privilege to be able to talk to you all together in one setting. So I think I covered everything I planned. So now we're going to start. Let me share my screen real quick. There we go. Super sound. Now I'm going to cut my video off because I don't want to distract you. So, Savannah, we're good? We're good, I hope? Okay. So, Paul Caponigro, impact and influence. That refers to the impact that he has had on the field of photography, which has been tremendous, and also to the influence that he's had on countless students. Whoops, let me make it work here. Okay, if you happen to see at the bottom of the flyer on the, not the flyer, but the electronic version on the web, you'll see that it says also that this exhibition is a tribute to all teachers and the immeasurable impact they can have, and do have, I should say, on their students. So again, some of my teachers from various realms are on this call, and I'll take this time to thank you from the bottom of my heart for all you've done in your worlds for me, and I thank you all at this time. And those of you that are students, don't forget to thank your teachers when you get down the road and are successful. Let your students know, your teachers know, that you appreciate them and what they did for you. So where's missing hold on, missing a slide. No, I guess we're not. We're good. Okay, so this all began about over 25 years ago now, and Mark Wood is on, which I'm glad he got in, because I had this, not desire, but it was more of I had to take a photography course, which I did at Chattanooga State, and Mark Wood was the professor, the teacher, and for part of the class, we went to the University of South to see an exhibit by Pradip Malde. And I really related to the work, the show. And so I kind of loitered really around to, he was probably wondering if this guy's ever going to leave, but I didn't till he talked to me. And then we talked, and he invited me back for a weekend, which I did. And while there, he took this book, Masterworks from 40 Years, plopped it in front of me, opened it up, and said, "This is the guy you need to study." And actually, I meant to keep my video on. Sorry, guys, I got out of whack. Where's my video? Oh, I've lost my. Anyway, you can do without me. Anyway, so when I looked at that book, I was totally transported into another world. It was just an incredible experience. And I said, oh my gosh, art and spirit are related. I'd never connected that. I didn't know anything about art, for one reason, and I didn't know anything about photography. So that was the beginning of a trajectory that has lasted throughout the present day, of trying to work in photography and convey experiences at many different levels. So fast forward to about 2017, and I went to a workshop with Keith Carter in Rockport, Maine, which is near where Paul lives. And there, I saw that there was going to be an exhibition with Paul and his son, John Paul, who's a well-known digital photographer. And I happened to like this book a lot, and I'd found a copy with one of Paul's images. So I brought it up there and said, maybe he'll sign it if he happens to show up, which I didn't think he would, but he was. So I walked up to him and I said, hi, I'm blah, blah, and would you sign this? And he said in Paul fashion, why would you want me to sign this? This is a book cover. And I said, well, because this book is what your work is about. And he just melted and shook my hand very warmly and said, well, let's talk. So that was the beginning of a relationship that ultimately led to me studying with him for about 1.5 years. I'd fly up to Maine and spend a few days with him. So I want you to get to know Paul a little bit in his own words and a visual. So this video is about 10 years old now. And let's see if I can get it started. And after that, I'm going to read some quotes and show some of his images. The quotes are all his, and the images are his unless I say otherwise. So until I come back, all the images, there's only one image of mine, and I'll mention that. So let's see if this will go for us.
I don't belong to this world. They dropped me off on the wrong planet at the wrong time. I like the ancient world. I don't like technology. I just don't like it. And all that machinery, I don't web, I don't cite, I don't Google, I don't and I don't crash. So as a teenager, I got my education outside of the usual universities, colleges. I went directly to the masters. My exposure was to what they call the West Coast School of Photography. Minor White was the one that impressed me the most. Ansel Adams, great photographer, wonderful landscapes, but Minor moved more in the spiritual area. He thought about things. He wanted to involve the psyche and what these photographs might mean that you take. Ansel liked to take things for what they are. And Minor would photograph not only for what they are, but for what else they are. In order to be a good photographer, you need to work more on your emotions than you do on your technique. So music is an avenue where it enlivens my feelings. It feeds, nourishes my emotional system. And if I have that as my assistant, then what I see takes on something from the heart. Silence is the greatest influence. Without that, you can't see or hear anything. And I don't talk or figure out my pictures before I make them. That would interfere with my stance of silence. A lot of image makers will talk themselves. Oh, well, now if you put it on zone 5 and you do this, and oh, that composition, well, I should leave out blah, blah, blah. You know, too much noise. I like surprises. And I wait until something, I can just turn my head. Boom, there it is. As a matter of fact, I was being called to supper when I saw that picture. And it was the last light of the day, the very last. And I thought, I have to get that picture. And I very quickly set it up, focused, put my film in, made the exposure, and the light left. The sun went down. What did I have to do with it? Luck. And I'm constantly experimenting, and I'm discovering. And one of the discoveries jumps out of the tray and says, you can go to lunch now, you got it. You bring nature here. As you can see, I have my collection of shells and stones and whatever hits my eye, I bring it in here and I work in that corner and make still lifes. I don't want to repeat the formula over and over again. I want to be free enough to see every day with fresh eyes.
I work to attain a state of heart, a gentle space offering inspirational substance that could purify one's vision. Photography, like music, must be born in the unmanifested world of spirit. Achieve the mystery of stillness, and you can experience a dynamic interaction with a life force that goes far beyond intellectual thought and touches the deepest wells of existence. I'm assuming you can hear me. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Because I can't find those controls for video. So now that is my image there. To me, the compelling quality of the stones is that they contain one of the greatest of all mysteries, that which can never be brought to physical manifestation, yet is discernible to our innermost consciousness. Locked in the silence of the stone complexes, lies a link to the world of the unutterable. I'm trying to make sound out of my silver prints and light with the tones at the piano. I'm trying to pull the dimensions of sound and light into the process of making prints and making music. Art and music became my means of worship to the unknown. I thought, as the ancients thought, that art is a sacred activity. As such, you are pursuing the sacred, which has to do with transcending what the poor beast has to go through. I'm after the mystery. That's the central goal, discovering your source, making a connection with that source. It's one thing to make a picture of what a person looks like. It's another thing to make a portrait of who they are. And that's my image there. Now I'm going to paraphrase that. It's one thing to make a picture of what something looks like. It's another thing to make a portrait of what it is. The key is to not let the camera, which depicts nature in so much detail, reveal just what the eye picks up, but what the heart picks up as well. So actually, Savannah, can you offer the video again for me there? Thank you. I'm back. Great. Okay. So now I'm going to share a little bit of photographic insight for the students and also some anecdotes with Paul. that make some points. Let's see here. There we go. So, a quote of Paul's: "Leaving things out is the beginning of composition." So this was a print I made, and I probably made 30 iterations of it to bring to show him. And I worked on the tree and the snow down the bottom right, the shadows under the covered area, the edge of the snow, the glistening road, and made all this work. And so I brought it to him, I showed it to him, and after about 5 seconds, he picks up another photograph and throws it over it and says, "That's your photograph." And for you students and other photographers, that's an important lesson. I found that often the more you take away, as he said in his quote, the more you actually get to the essence of the object or whatever you're trying to display. So keep that in mind. Nowadays, I often find I start here and I just go, "Oh," and I go, "There it is. That's got it now." So this is a photograph. It's really, that's meant to be done that way. Photographers know that's a negative, but it's printed as the negative. And I'll read you a quote of Paul's and then explain this to you. "In my encounters with stones, it was repeatedly confirmed for me that the earth has an intelligence and a pulse of its own. I believe my effort to remain a friend to the earth brought me to the megaliths and granted me rare moments of harmony with nature and the greater source." So this photo is representing one of those moments. I was with Paul at Joshua Tree National Park. He'd never been there, and we were traveling from Santa Fe to Monterey. So I took him, I'd been there, so I took him to one of my favorite spots, and we parked, and he didn't always get out of the car, so I got out of the car, and he would usually open the doors, and I would wander. So I went up to this rock, and I put my hand on it, both hands, and all of a sudden this current of love poured out of the rock and through my being. And I was near tears. It was just so beautiful. And I didn't probably want to break down in front of Paul, so I got all I could, and then I went back to the car, and I got in, I sat down. I didn't say anything. And he was staring straight ahead at the rock, and he said to me, "The rock spoke to me. It told me that it was an utterance from God." I told him what happened to me, and we left. No discussions. Paul doesn't use a lot of words, and he certainly doesn't like to talk about spiritual matters, this, that, intellectualized. It was the experience, and off we went. But that was one of those moments of harmony where he totally communed with nature, and the rock's consciousness spoke to him. So this is a treat. You're going to get to see Paul's complete digital portfolio, all 2 pictures. This is a photo taken with my iPhone, which he'd never taken a digital photo before. I'd be surprised if he's taken any since we were together. I showed him how to hit the button, and he took the camera like this and moved around like it was a pendulum trying to find its gravity point, and then he shot. Then he hands me back and says, "People don't pay enough attention to shapes in their photographs anymore." And if you look at this wonderful composition that he made in this photograph, and I'm sure part of that movement around was to keep my head from popping over the edge of the mountains. It's just a real lesson in symmetry and beauty, honestly. And if you notice the light, this doesn't do it credit, but it was twilight, that orange light that runs across prairies and such. And he said, "What a gracious light." Not a pretty light, not a soft light, a gracious light. A few days later, he said to me, "What a tender cloud." And what I saw there was that his eyes are poets. They're poets, and he relates to nature and the world in a different way than I do, in a more graceful, poetic way. And that prompted me to take a poetry class. But I saw how he felt when he was looking at nature. being with Paul, he doesn't give you a lecture. He'll make a statement and boom, you take it and run with it or you don't. But so much of what he said, just like, there's your photograph, that could have been an hour-long lecture, but all it was there's your photograph and you take it from there. So the next photograph, again, this is the second of his complete works, the complete digital works of Paul Caponigro, you could say. Again, a lovely composition. And if you've been to Joshua Tree, or if you haven't, then you haven't, it's just this incredible field of rocks, the whole national park, and boulders. And we were driving through, and again, just a statement. If I were to come here with a camera, it would be 5 days before I could take a photograph. There's too many photographs here. I would have to find the ones that distill this place to its essence. So a friend of ours, many of you know, Tim Whelan, always says that Paul seemed to just know where to place his tripod. Well, he knew in part because he was present. He was in the present moment. He didn't just run, oh, there it is, just like that photo of me. He didn't just, oh, hey, Dave, kick there. He moved, boom, there it is. So for all you students and photographers, slow down, get present, find the right moment, and then shoot. And I think I'm going to wind up with, that's it, 2 quotes. The first one is, it's not really from me, it's something that came in contemplation, is the best way to put it. And the second one is Paul's. It's his version of the same idea. So, art is God in expression. The connection between the God force's creative aspect and art is rarely appreciated, as man tends to take credit for his creativity and assumes it has been gained by his own hard work and natural talent, to which he rarely attributes God as his benefactor. Perhaps the greatest way to open the channels of creativity is to become grateful for the gifts you have been given. This will open the doorway for more to come into you, and the flow will continue to expand into a mighty river. This river will cleanse all in its path. And I'll end with a quote of Paul's that has always been one of my favorites. Maybe that was Paul speaking to me in contemplation. The only way a work of art can become great is for one to acknowledge that it doesn't belong to anybody. The greatness is in constantly giving back, coming to an acknowledgement of the source. If the individual personality can relinquish its insistence on concepts like, this is mine, I did it, this is original, nobody else has done it, it goes straight for greatness or the essential spirit. So thank you for listening and watching, and I hope you got an insight into Paul's inner being. And now I will turn this over to Pradip, to whom I have a great debt as to the effect and influence he has as a teacher, not only my photographic life, but my personal life, because you really can't separate the artistic and personal life. So Pradip, take it away, and I'll stop sharing here. Point. There we go.
Great. Wow. Thank you so much, Dave. I don't know if we have full sound and video. Savannah, are we good here?
Yeah, you're both great. Thank you. And
Great.
just a reminder
Okay.
for anyone who's maybe tuned in while David was talking, if you have questions, please feel free to send them to me in the chat. After Pradip's finished with his presentation, we will do a time of Q&A. Thank you.
Great. Savannah, I think you got my video, and I'll switch in just a minute to the slideshow. But I just, before I start, I want to say some really important thanks as well. I'll join Dave in thanking the Creative Arts Guild for what an amazing place that is. I walked in there for the first time several weeks ago, and my head was abuzz. There's a lot of energy in that place. Whoever lives nearby, I really, really encourage you to go out and visit it. And the exhibition, Savannah, is just beautifully hung. Thank you so much. I'm honored thrice over, honored once that my work is being shown with Paul Caponigro, honored twice that my work is being shown with Dave, and honored thrice that you put up the whole show and beautifully sequenced it. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay. And I do want to say one more important thanks, and we can jump to the first blank there. That's great, thanks. Before I really get going on this, yeah, this matter of what one does as a teacher and student, and actually we do this simultaneously. We're always learning and we're always passing on what we learn to others. But there's a really interesting intermediate point, which is, and I think most teachers will agree with me, if not all teachers, that we as teachers learn more from our students than the students ever learn from us. So thank you. Okay, I'm going to just talk a little bit. I'm going to talk for about 15 minutes. I've got a few slides to show you. And as I go through them, again, please feel free to drop in questions or any comments in the chat window, and Savannah will shunt them forward to all of us. I grew up taking photographs. My father was a photographer, and he earned his living selling cameras, providing a photo processing and printing service, and taking photographs of wildlife in Tanzania. That was my home. He and my mother established a business in a small town, Arusha, which is now a huge metropolis. But taking photographs as a, 3-year-old, working with a camera, even learning how to process film and make black and white prints was something that was part of my day-to-day childhood. And like so many things that we all take for granted, I really did not pay any attention to just how special this whole experience was, the process was. Instead, it just kind of became part of my nature. By nature here, I mean it in the broadest sense, not just what is inside each of us, but also what we are a part of what is out there in our natural environment. Fast forward a little bit, it wasn't until around 1975, so by this time I'm almost 16, 17 years old, once my family had moved to England and I was just finishing up high school. It's the A levels in the British system. My sense of nature and myself began to unravel when I saw one photograph. We'll go to the next slide, Savannah. This one.
Sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties. Give me one.
Yeah, that's okay. It's the one of the apple. There we go. Great. And I had, I was doing an A level in art. I had started doing photography as a part of my art class. And it was something that kind of came easily to me. Surprise. No, not really, because I've been doing this all my life. And my teacher, Miss Imogen Rowlands, probably recognized that I was a lousy draftsman and not very good at painting. My teacher at this Quaker school called Friend School in Saffron Walden encouraged me to keep going with photography. And then she told me one day, hey, you should go down to London, see this exhibition at the Hayward Gallery called The Land. It was a survey of 20th century landscape photography, and I saw this print by Paul Caponigro. I saw other work that also changed my life, but this one, I had never seen a photograph like this. A galaxy that looked like an apple that looked like a galaxy, for sure. But I also felt like my whole nature, my sense of being was both shrinking and expanding simultaneously. It became like a key that opened up new ways of thinking about the visual world that a photograph could say things that I did not actually see. This was mind-blowing to me. And for the first time ever, I realized that a photograph was not just a representation of some moment and some time in the past, but it was also a piece of paper with marks on it. It's an exquisite array of tones all over the surface. And it was this kind of dance, going back and forth with different ways of looking and thinking about a photograph, that completely mesmerized me. The next thing I remember is this guy saying, you need to move along, sir. I couldn't walk away from that print. So go to the next slide. So fast forward decades, and I took this photograph in Greece. And over all those years, I've learned, as Paul Caponigro often says in many, many different ways, to listen to the voice of the photograph. And more specifically, and this is something Paul actually said, listen to the voice of the print. Now, what do we mean by that? There are many ways to interpret the voice. The voice of the print implies that the negative, and this is something Ansel Adams already talked about, the negative is somehow a manuscript, a musical score that can be interpreted in multiple ways. All right, let's take that for a minute and rethink it. We could say that the negative is like a throat and the entire body of a singer. But we can also step further back in thinking about this simile. What about if a photograph begins way before the click of a shutter? Let's go to the next slide. And I think this is what Paul means when he's talking about ancient presence and feelings in his work that are from another time and place. When he talks about belonging somewhere ancient rather than here and now, I think he's also referring to what compels us to make a photograph. What brings you and me to this moment of taking a photograph is actually extensive. It includes not only the lens of the camera itself, the sensor or type of film that you're using, or the events playing out in front of the lens, but also our entire lifetimes of feeling. And who's to say with absolute assurance that our being is just about the physical world? Our capacity, for example, to empathize and to extend beyond ourselves into the lives of others, that's pretty special. And that same capacity, I believe, informs Paul's work profoundly. And it was this that I learned when I saw the Apple photograph, or this photograph. And I took all of that into the next slide. And I have come to realize that it almost doesn't matter what I photograph or you photograph. Here's a photograph of my white German Shepherd's hair, just a mass of hair, and a very thoroughly used remainder of a disc of soap. Now, this thing about it doesn't matter what one photographs is something that Edward Weston noted many times over in his famous day books in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. And yet everything matters when you photograph, and especially your feelings matter when you photograph. Paul says that again and again. I also believe that when you photograph is not something that happens at the click of the shutter. When you photograph happens as we process the film or process the image in the digital space. When you photograph continues to happen as you begin to shape the image towards presenting it to others, framing it, putting it into book, and so on. Making the print, in other words, is just as much about when you photograph as is the lifetime of experiences leading up to the shutter click. So the biggest lesson that I have learned from Paul, the greatest influence he has had on me, has been to bring the entire making of a photograph into a territory that is beyond what we see optically and is firmly ensconced in what we have always felt, always are. I think this is what he means when he says he belongs to another age. Go to the next slide. So making in this sense implies that there is some kind of a tight relationship between our feelings and the processes we use to express and to put into the world the things we make. Now, I've learned from images such as this one of Paul's that the process itself has a profound shaping effect on the expression. This sounds twisted, I know. The materials and the equipment that are used to produce a photograph, and also the way each of these are manipulated, are part of a constantly recursive circle like a helix. And they determine to a large extent the kind of photograph we make. For example, the next slide. I would not have made this kind of a photograph without being deeply aware of a number of things. So this is out in Lake Baikal. And it was night. I mean, you can see it right there in the photograph. I needed a long exposure. My tripod was standing on a dock that itself was shifting ever so slightly. And the moon was progressing across the sky. With a long exposure and the shifting dock, I knew the moon would actually create a squiggle of light on my negative. I was shooting with an 8x10 camera. I also knew that I would be printing this negative in platinum palladium. It's a process that's known for its very soft tonal scale, tonal range, its highly nuanced renderings of deep blacks and very, very delicate whites. And altogether, those aspects of what I knew my process to be almost made me take this photograph. I could not resist. Go to the next slide. So here we see that cloud in San Sebastian, New Mexico by Paul. To understand how feeling and process are intertwined, you have to find some correspondence between the physical world and the emotional world. It's like translating one language into the other. A mark or a shape of a certain kind can evoke certain feelings and emotions. A juxtaposition of certain tonal values can do similar specific things. We're now talking about almost synesthetic experiences, but I don't think it's actually quite that simple, dare I say. You see, the way feelings and process are intertwined is very, very fluid and very dynamic. Go to the next slide of the moon, again, towards Cancer. Great. We all know that our feelings change all the time, right? But we think of process, especially in the context of photography, and we heard Paul in that video say something very similar. We think of process as being all about the machinery and the chemistry and the technology and composition, blah, 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 right? And maybe at a push about light and about time and about the critical moment of clicking the shutter. And we include in process the critical relationship between subject and photographer. But there's more here. Process also includes the way we read and understand a photograph. And this aspect is a very important part of what we do with photography and with photographs. And by we, I mean anybody, everybody who even looks at a photograph. We are always processing an image. And that image, amazingly, as a print especially, is always changing our feelings. Next slide. as a teacher, I am fascinated by how we learn. Dave's relationship and my relationship with Paul's work may be an interesting case in point here. Dave has learned from Paul's work and from Paul directly. Lucky guy. Well, he made his luck. Dave has seen more of his actions face to face as such than I have ever seen in person. And Dave has spent many, many hours with Paul. I have never had the honor of meeting him. The majority of my experience with Paul has been through looking at his work in books. And I've cherished the few times that I've actually been able to see his prints in person. But despite these varieties of experiences, I am fairly certain that both Dave and I have done one thing together, or in the same way, which is that we have both read Paul's work very closely. And this kind of close reading influences one at a very deep level. In other words, the nature of influence, the nature of deep influence, percolates back up through the many layers of personal experience. So again, what do I mean by that? So take one last look at this picture. Okay, it's a forest, and we'll go to the next slide. Also a forest. This is Dave's photograph. And there are some obvious correspondences between Paul's photograph of a forest and Dave's. But at a certain level, there is a deeper correspondence. I feel that Paul's influence on this photograph is more about the symbolic relationships between light and dark. It's no longer just a forest. Or, go to the next slide, as it is here too. Certainly, there are what I call formal or structural correspondences across all three images, but this is about how we feel when we are surrounded by a swarm of experience, how we yearn as humans for luminance, and the symbolism that light out of darkness stands for. So just a few more slides. Next slide. When we sit, as I think Newton put it, on the shoulders of giants, we also learn, thanks to those giants, to be brave and to take risks and to challenge what we think and what we know. This photograph by Paul is a gutsy photograph. There's hardly anything anywhere. How that carries over his influence is very, very interesting. For instance, opposites are at play here. But these opposites, the brilliant cloud on the left, the dark tree on the right, are just one tiny part of a much more vast skyscape that is made up of not polarities, but simply shifting grays. There's hardly anything there. It's very harmonious. So again, note this photograph, and then we go to the next slide. And here, we certainly have opposites and shifting grays. We've seen this image already before. And the net result is just pure magic. Dave's photograph feels fully within the realm of what we know and understand. Oh, there's steam coming out, and our brain tells us where the steam's coming from. Oh, there's a dark cutout figure, but we know it's a silhouette, and so on. But it seems to have arrived out of something very ancient and very intangible. There is mystery here. Right? So to the next slide. And so I come full circle. Knowing the Galaxy Apple deep in my head and my heart, very clearly thinking about the final platinum palladium print, I made this photograph. And it was made in an incredibly short time. The sun was setting and it was going down fast. As I made this photograph with an 8x10 camera, was becoming the image, knowing the boulder, the setting sun, the puff of cloud. And in this way of working the way Paul works, there actually is no room for technical thinking. And Paul talks specifically about that. You heard him in that video where he says he's not working as a technician, but always working from feeling. That is true. And working from feeling can only happen if the mechanics of work are fully absorbed into one's being. The technical is just like the material world, has to be absorbed until it becomes imagination. It has to be absorbed into this thing that the ancient Greeks called poiesis, something that is brought into being only because, in this case, of its photographic making. Otherwise, it wouldn't be. Poiesis, the poetic, is about the power of imagination, the power of the human consciousness, that the act of making and the thing that is made in turn somehow makes the world. So thanks, Paul. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, students everywhere. Okay. And I think we can shift modes a little bit here. I think you're muted, Savannah.
Hi, sorry, I was having some issues with everything. We're good now, but I couldn't see myself.
Thank you.
So,
well,
so let me pull up the questions that we have gotten. I did have somebody ask about a little walkthrough of the gallery space, and we'd be happy to do that. I can do that now, or I can wait. Maybe if I can actually, why don't I walk through, just have the camera panning while you guys are kind of answering and talking through some of the questions that we've gotten answered. So let me see. Okay, I got like 4 that just came in all at once. So the first one is from Sarah Murray, and she wanted to know if, and this is for both of you, do you find that you are able to successfully capture the spiritual aspect of your photographs in digital form, or do you feel like it's easier to do with film, which I think is interesting because I know, David, you kind of primarily shoot digitally and work digitally, and Pradip, I'm not really entirely sure, but I know you've kind of worked substantially in film. So I think that would be kind of a great way to kind of talk about, for both of you, how it's a different process.
Dave, do you want to jump in?
What was the first part of the question? I missed the first.
Oh, sorry. So this is from Sarah. She said, do you find that you are able to successfully capture the spiritual aspect of your photographs in digital form as well, or do you find it's easier to do so with film?
That is a really, really good question, to be honest. That gets into the really core of things, and that being does.
Sorry, Dave, I'll just interrupt. Sorry. Savannah,
Yes.
I think everyone is only seeing my screen.
Oh,
right
you're
now.
okay.
Or my image.
You're still in spotlight view. Okay. Sorry, I had us all in gallery view, so it didn't pop that way.
So, and now it's just whoever's talking, I think. And if you want to do a walk around, maybe you should pin yourself while Dave and I talk.
Yeah, let me do that. And I think.
There you go. We got it.
I think I can. Oh, no, I guess not. Okay, perfect.
Nope, you're back. Nope.
Yeah, got it. Okay.
Walk around after so it doesn't distract from. What do you think, Pradip?
Yeah.
Anyway.
I don't mind either way.
Well,
okay. I'll let you guys talk.
Anyway, that's a really, really great question that I've thought about many times, and I get tempted to go back to silver. And sometimes, because it gets down to, okay, we're going to dive in deep here. It gets down to the ability to capture the unseen energies, and metallic ions like silver, which is particularly good at doing that, can capture certain energy. That's different than what a digital sensor captures. Having said that, when you process, as Pradip so wonderfully pointed out, it's a process from capture to printing. And ultimately, the work is going to reflect the consciousness of the artist. Okay. I used to call cameras energy capturing devices, that they were capturing the energy and then transferring it. So digital captures a certain wavelength in a certain way, silver another way. But, and again, I've thought about this a lot. And when it comes to the printing is the final pathway. And at that point, the artist can add that depth of consciousness to the work. So while the silver may help smooth that along easier and perhaps capture some things, at the end result, in my world, that spiritual addition is really at the level of the print. When you get to that level, you're putting your consciousness into it. You can pray over it. You can do whatever. You can charge it in whatever way works. But the best way is to elevate your own spiritual awareness, because then that will always reflect in your art, and it will reflect with the digital also. But I'll give a slight edge, maybe a bigger edge to silver. A lot of the people that work with healing say, I need a black and white photo of that person to do it, because that has their energy. So that is a really, really good and deep question, and one which has made me lately think, maybe I'll go back to silver again, just to see. So Sarah, thank you for that really, really wonderful question. Great question.
I'll just quickly add to that. So Dave was definitely speaking as he is by profession and nature as a healer. This is about healing. I have a slightly different take on it. That it doesn't matter what materials and processes you use, Sarah. What matters is how you move through them. So it's just another way of putting what Dave said. Many have said, well, I like film more because it forces me to slow down, which is true. It's a slower process than digital. But one can slow down with digital too. And actually, slowing down is not the issue here. It is being intensely present. Right? So for many people, the easiest way to be fully present somewhere is slowing down. But actually, you say that to an Aikido master and says, or mistress, or whatever, an Aikido they, and they will say, it's not about time. It is about fully being present. So that's what I would say in response. How you do that, if you're working with a digital camera, basic exercises, stick your camera on a tripod and then work quickly.
Well said, well said. Paul is a master of presence.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. All that can supersede any of the materials, that end result of being present while you print. I would say the same thing, being present while you print. Yeah. Very nice, very nice.
So I think something, especially because I know we have so many students who have kind of tuned in and joined us. Pradip, you did such a great job talking about the different types of influence and mentor relationship. And I think I know how I felt as an undergraduate student in photography. And David, you should also talk about this too, in the way that you make your own luck. What would you say to students who are maybe starting out right now, getting ready to graduate, are interested in kind of developing that relationship with another photographer?
Yeah, I'll say three things. One, if you find a photographer that you are completely moved by, whose work you're moved by, write them a letter, okay? Let them know how you feel and expect nothing back, but just let them know. That's one thing. The second thing is, and with that one thing, so here's the book that I showed Dave years ago, okay? And this is the first book that I bought. I bought this book after seeing the Apple photograph, right? And just to prove my point, here it is. It says Pradip Malde 1976, right? I bought it in London. I went to school with this in my hand and I was just blazing at this point. Okay, so in this book with Paul, this is the closest contact I have with Paul. 3 letters. One written in 1991 when I mustered up all my guts and wrote him a note out of the blue to thank him for all he'd done for me. I'd never met him, okay? So the second thing is look at work. And the best way to look at work right now, and we are living in a golden age of photo books. Go to bookstores, go online, whatever it takes. Say to yourself, I'm going to save up as much as I can, and every month I'm going to buy 1 book and then really study it. Okay. And the third thing is make prints. Don't stop at seeing your images on screen. Make a print and then put it in the books that you love. Right in there. Put it in there, right? And then think about how it compares and what it does to you.
David, do you want to add anything to that? Because I feel like you, on so many levels, have, you know.
Go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to reiterate what Pradip has said, which is, you know, you've kind of plowed forward and forged these relationships. And part of that is just showing up, I think. And you can kind of speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, I've been very blessed to establish relationships with quite a few photographers, and photographers, I find as a rule, are very giving and willing to share their knowledge. And the workshop format, I think, has traditionally been that. Paul used to give workshops, Ansel Adams gave workshops. That's a traditional way. So one way is you go to workshops and you meet them, the teachers, and I often did workshops not because I necessarily cared for the work. I wanted to meet the professor, the teacher. I wanted to meet them. I wanted to feel their energy. I wanted to see how they existed. I did one of my most important workshops with a photographer named Thatcher Cook, and I saw on the internet there was his advertisement. He's not really a right term. One of his friends is on. Sean, forgive me if I get it wrong. He's a close friend. But I would call it a street photography workshop. I didn't do street photography, but the image that was on that just blew me away. And I said, I have to meet this guy. I have to meet this guy. So I did a workshop in California, totally changed things for me. He said, you know, Dave, you need to learn to photograph from here. And hit himself in the heart. And that's what was in that photograph, even though it was a street photograph. And so you have to make your luck. Pradip's right, you make your luck. I navigated my way to Paul through a few different routes, and it worked out. But if you can afford to do workshops, but again, if you can't, like Pradip said, you can establish other means of communication, but also the communication with their work is what Pradip, I think, was talking about. You can always have this communication with their work, and that will expand you in yourself. I mean, that one book that Pradip showed me, and if I'd never met Paul, that changed my trajectory. It affirmed something I didn't know existed. Everything changed, like Pradip said, when he saw the apple, everything, well, that went, you know, what's going on? So there's a lot of levels. If you're fortunate enough to be able to put yourself in front of them, go to one of their shows and just introduce yourself. You know, hi, you signed this book? Why would I sign that book? You know, but then you go from there. So that's my advice.
Our next question comes from Hunter Swinson. How do you navigate between subconscious reactionary photographing and the technical? What thought frameworks would you suggest holding to achieve a harmonious balance?
I'll just jump in and I'll try to be succinct because I know this is Dave's area. So, this is again about learning through photographing, I think. Okay. We all have to remember that all the stuff we're talking about you don't just wake up in the morning and suddenly you are this way, that suddenly you're working the way Paul works. And also that you don't always be that way. You're not always the way Paul works or all the stuff we're talking about. But this is a constant progression and a shifting way of being. Okay, with that said, keep in mind that we, as each human being, through whatever means that we are so inclined to adopt as our expressive form, are doing that, are becoming artists, as Paul talked about, as being technicians of the sacred, if you will, in order to get a broader sense of what I and we are, right? You're always trying to zoom out of the here and nowness of your situation to understand existential questions, certainly, but to understand things that we haven't understood before, things that we don't even know how to frame a question around. And the process of taking photographs is one way of doing that. So to your question, Hunter, you bring everything you know to the moment of taking a photograph, but you also become brave and you take risks in the taking of the photograph. Okay, look for something more every time. And it's not something more in order to impress the neighbor or the gallery or the photo club or your teacher. It is something more so that you understand yet another connection. Okay, that's it.
Very nice. You know, I approach it like this. I've often said that to be a better photographer, I have to be a better person. And by the better person, I mean that I have to expand my relationship with what Paul calls the mystery. Some people don't like the word God, that's fine, doesn't matter. But to expand that, and quite frankly, that quote I said about gratitude is one way to expand yourself regardless of what you believe. But it's really about, at one level, it's about opening your heart. And Paul talks about that a great deal, photographing from your heart. And that's not, there's a consciousness in the heart, and Paul talks, it's not about emotion. That's one level, but there's a consciousness to the heart. It's all its own, just like your mind. So when I say go to print, I do things to, whatever you are creating in art, it's going to reflect your whole being. And my whole goal has been to get out of the way. And now everybody has certain things, you know, inside them, their psyche, that get in the way of that mystery. That's what this whole lifetime is about, trying to pull those pieces away so the mystery becomes clearer. I mean, there's things I do to clear those bodies before I go in the darkroom, so that I don't unintentionally put something into the work that is subconsciously disruptive. So I have techniques I do. But it's really about, in the bigger sense, is opening yourself to that mystery, which is really opening yourself to love, if you want to know the truth. And that is how I go about it, and try to just continue to expand that way, and it can't help but be reflected in my work. I hope that was something to do with the question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I have just two more, and actually they're both on the topic of books. Mark Wood has sent out a recommendation for anyone who's interested in getting into purchasing photo books. I'm sending a link in the group chat so that everyone should get this link. But the Charcoal Book Club, Charcoal Press, they're like the one and only book of the month photography book. And so he highly recommended, not just that they're already doing good work and curating great work, but if you're really interested in getting into collecting photographic books, he highly recommended the book of the month. And then a question for both of you is from one of my professors, is from Craig Stevens, and he asked, what book, non-photographic, would you recommend to someone who wished to expand the level of their creative spirit?
Okay, while you're thinking, then I'm going to take a turn thinking about this so that I can answer the question itself. I just want a quick plug here. Yes, Mark, absolutely right. Charcoal Book Clubs is awesome. I subscribe to them. It may seem like the price of subscription is high because it's several $100s, but believe me, you get a book every month. The book is invariably a lesson, a workshop in itself. They're awesome selections. And I'll also say that Charcoal Press, the affiliate company that goes to Charcoal Books, is publishing my book in May. So I'm really, really excited about that. My first
I just
book,
need to jump in and ask, are you going to be a book club pick?
Yes, it's going to go out, I think, in the June issue or something. I hope I've not done something I shouldn't have done by talking about things that haven't.
Everyone here is sworn to secrecy, gag order through the summer. But also go and subscribe now so you can get Pradip's book. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay.
And one of the co-owners or co-founders of Charcoal Book Club just today had twins. So yay, Jesse and his lovely wife. Sorry, you have an answer, Dave?
Yeah, two. One, on the books. Books are an incredibly good way to collect photography. You can buy an amazing book, often for $50, $75, gorgeous books. There's several different presses, the Nazreli Press, others, that just create these wonderful books. And for under $100, it's just a work of art. So I have a huge book collection, You know, enough said on that. As far as one book, I think that I would go to my go-to book that I recommend to any teacher and student, which is If You Want to Write. It's an old book by Brenda Ueland, U-E-L-A-N-D. Okay, If You Want to Write. And there's several versions on Amazon because it's an old book. At the time, Carl Sandburg said it was the best book on writing that he'd ever seen or read. But it's really about the creative spirit. And it's about following your own voice. And I think that's extremely important. I had a quote. I cut my talk way down, just importantly. And one of the quotes, though, was about that. One of Paul's quotes was about shoveling away the influence of others. And sometimes you need to shovel a lot away and find, probably sort of hinted on this and talk of your own inspiration. And yes, you can learn from others, but ultimately new things do occur, and that's within your own inspiration. So if you're a student, here's my take. I hate the word critique because it puts in our society people on the defensive immediately. People I've enjoyed the most rarely said I like or don't like that. They say, well, you know, if you did this, it might express what you're trying to say. So there's technical pieces that help you express your vision. When someone comes and tries to tell you what your vision should be, you should run as fast as you can to the other door. When I first met Pradip, I showed him a bunch of images. I was into form and Zen-like photos. Then I had this other abstract thing. Now, he didn't say that's better. He just said, he looked at him and said, why don't you go down that road for a while? You don't remember that probably. I
do.
He said, why don't you go down that road? And that road also had Masao Yamamoto, which he exposed me to, which told me, oh, I have permission to do anything I want in a photo. There's no rules. There's one side that's very formal. This is how you do it. You know, they have the dark to the light, blah, blah, blah. Well, Sal's over here making these incredible prints that have no rules as far as they do in a sense, but not. So that's just my advice. If you feel so your inner voice goes, oh, then now if you have to get through a class, say, okay, yes, I'll do what you like, but never give up your vision. Some of the very famous people were ridiculed for their work, but they stuck with it and became famous for the work they were ridiculed for. So that's my babble.
Well, I'll actually springboard off that as well. It's what you've said, vision is it, but I'll try and be more specific even than that. So the book I would recommend to everybody is by Elaine Scarry. She's an amazing poet, Scarry, and the book is called On Beauty and Justice. On Beauty and Being Just. Now, the thing about this book is that it puts, in a very convincing way, beauty and justice together. Everybody listening, and sorry we've gone on a bit, we should be wrapping up soon, I suppose, but everybody still here, anybody who doesn't believe in justice, put your hand up. Right. Okay, nobody will. We all do. Now, I won't ask this as a hand up for everybody, but we have all had a moment where we've gone as artists and said, oh, what's the point of me doing this? Why does me being self-expressive matter? And Scarry's book, actually, in putting beauty and justice in an equivalent relationship, gives each one of us full permission to fully commit to a life of creative work. But it comes with a price. And the price is you will make a difference on bettering the human species and the world if you work well, because that's what justice is. Okay? That's the price. And we're in the business, all of us here are in the business of making something beautiful. By making something beautiful, we have the potential to change the world we live in. It's a mind blower of a book, and it's really thin, and you could read it in one night.
That is fantastic, Pradip. You know, I think I'm going to spring off on that. When you make art, I'm going to put it in terms, it's a karmic experience, actually. Just like if I said something nice or rude to Pradip, I've created a karmic little thing there. So when you put out your work, you are affecting the consciousness of the viewer. Now, that's the karmic. Now, sometimes in certain situations, you want to cause discomfort and grave perhaps attention, like Lewis Hine and children working in factories. Those weren't comfortable, and it made the world a better place. But by beauty, you also create a positive. As I say, I'd like with my work to touch someone's heart in a good way. And that's very meaningful when someone says, you know, I get up and I see that photograph in the morning and I feel good. That's bettering the world one little bit at a time. And my goodness, look at what Paul's work has done to the world of photography. So what you do is very important, and your intention behind it. You know, if you throw up stuff that just disturbs consciousness for no good reason, well, you're creating some bad karma in my world. So I think probably I really need to look at that book, because that's really beautiful what you said. Thank you. Very good.